Hello, everyone. In this talk, I'm going to go over the CyberGuardians initiative, where we trained older members of the community to be knowledgeable about cybersecurity so they could then help their peers protect themselves online. The main reason why we did this is because we know that older adults are actively targeted by cyber criminals, yet older adults don't always have the right sources of information. We know that they heavily rely on their physical social networks, yet having access to that security expert is not always the case. And therefore, we set out to train older members of the community to provide that support. We did this through 3 stages. In the first stage, we recruited 14 older adults through our project partners, the University of the Third Age, Whitley Bay, and the Older Life Heritage Centre. And then we developed the necessary training in order to make sure that they knew how to protect themselves. We did this by looking at the academic literature, by looking at government reports, but also through conversations with our project partners and the CyberGuardians themselves. So we ended up looking at password management, which was a big issue across all domains, protecting from online scams, which again was a big issue across all domains, and then looking at protective software, which was identified by the CyberGuardians as a potential issue. After the training sessions, we had 2 sharing sessions, one at month 4 and one at month 6. And then we had final interviews at month 9 with all the CyberGuardians. So the bulk of our data comes from those focus groups and interviews, as well as the journals and a large-scale survey. So we ended up training 14 older adults to become CyberGuardians. And we noted that those 14 older adults shared best practice directly with 470 citizens, whether informally or formally, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. But we also found that those 470 citizens then shared the best practice with an additional 350 people. So those 14 older adults ended up reaching over 800 individuals with their advice. In terms of key findings, we saw that the CyberGuardians used both informal and formal opportunities to share cybersecurity information, but it was the informal sharing opportunities that seemed to have the greatest effect. So, for example, being at a restaurant, cybersecurity comes up, probably has issues with passwords, and it gives them an opportunity to, in an informal setting, just share what might be done in order to better manage passwords. This was pointed out by our project partner, how the informal environment, in a way, puts older people at ease when it comes to giving over this information. But quite importantly, what we found from the opportunistic information sharing is that the CyberGuardians were able to reach individuals who we would typically not be able to reach through running the traditional training workshops and training events. For example, the cyber citizen here explains how that is not something that they're interested in, but they were glad that they were able to have the conversations about how to protect themselves online effectively and in a simple way. The behavior change, what was a very interesting aspect from the project. So we recruited older adults who were not necessarily technically savvy. They knew how to use technology, but the majority did not have a background in IT. Therefore, when we went through the behaviors on how to protect themselves online, these were behaviors that they were learning through the training, and they changed their behaviors throughout the training. This meant that when talking to citizens, whether they were friends, family, or completely new people, they had their experience of changing those behaviors that they then used in order to communicate with those citizens. So, for example, here, the cyber citizen explains how actually talking them through how our cyber guardian can actually change these behaviors help them do it as well. And then finally, of course, there were community benefits where having knowledgeable people around and readily available meant that simple cybersecurity questions could be asked and could be answered. But we also observed benefits for the cyber guardians, where they were able to work in groups and form friendships that lasted beyond the project. So that is a very quick overview of the CyberGuardians project. Special thanks to my co-authors, Ben, Matt, Jack, Lynne, and Jill, and of course our project partners, the University of the Third Age, Whitley Bay, and